Chapter 265. Jagan 5. The castle ground had entirely disappeared, and the ceiling of the underground space had vanished as well. Rhaenyra had been worried that the ceiling would cave in, but this was worse than anything she had imagined. It wasn't at all more comforting to see the whole ceiling disappear, and Rhaenyra continued to scream with panic. Rhaenyra's panicked cries were suddenly cut off when she spotted Eugene hovering high above her in the air. For a moment she just stood there, clutching her chest while trying to catch her breath. She had no idea what was happening or how it was possible, but she knew one thing for certain. This was the most dire crisis she had ever faced in her 200 years of life. Her lips moved soundlessly as she struggled to make sense of the situation and figure out what to do next. Eugene stole a glance down at the now exposed core of the Dragon Demon Castle. He had been thinking that Rhaenyra would be safe underground, but it seemed he had underestimated the raw power that Jagan possessed. "Have you come to rescue this lady?" asked Rhaenyra after a moment. Seeing that Rhaenyra was about to fly out of the hole, Eugene extended his palm instead of answering her question. "Stay there," said Eugene. "What?" "It will be much safer there than here," responded Eugene. "Or so he says." Rhaenyra lowered her posture once more without arguing. "Wait, isn't it better for you to destroy the core right now? Then this lady will be able to get away from the Dragon Demon Castle, and we won't have to worry about me getting caught up." Rhaenyra's words were very valid, but Eugene didn't even bother hearing them through. There's no way a dragon would die that easily. The worst outcome that Eugene could imagine was Rhaenyra getting caught up in the battle and ultimately dying. However, as a dragon, Rhaenyra was very sturdy, and she even knew how to utilize a little bit of draconic. She was capable enough to keep herself safe. Eugene couldn't afford to think about Rhaenyra anymore, at least not when was Jagan approaching him from afar now. With malice and an aura of destruction surrounding him, Jagan finally broke away from being an unrecognizable lump of meat. He wasn't much different from before in terms of appearance. The only noticeable difference was that he was slightly bigger than before. Yet, the ominous energy surrounding him was much greater in intensity compared to before. No matter how sturdy Rhaenyra was, she would surely die if she were struck by Jagan's terrible energy. This wasn't just speculation, it was a fact proven by history. Dragons were vulnerable to the dark power of demon kings. In particular, almost half of all dragons had been wiped out at the hands of the Demon King of Destruction. It was much safer to prevent Jagan from approaching Rhaenyra at all. "Stay there and don't move," warned Eugene once more before slowly flying forward. He had no reason to rush as Jagan was standing motionlessly for unknown reasons in the middle of the dark power. Oh dear. Count Carrad stood tall on the back of a flying demonic beast, taking in the delightful scenery of the Dragon Demon Castle turning into ruins. The dukedom had been safeguarded by the Black Dragon's name for 3 centuries, but it was now being ruthlessly destroyed. Furthermore, the individual accountable for this was none other than him. A nobleman from the fringes who had demonstrated his remarkable skills and proved himself time and time again to be an outstanding demon. Count Carrad was ecstatic at the sight before him. He relished in the destruction and chaos that spread all over like wildfire. In fact, he was so enraptured that he could have watched for days on end. However, his euphoria was short-lived because he caught sight of Jagan hurtling an unrelenting storm of malice and energy toward them. The flying troops, including Count Carrad, were rooted to the spot, unable to move or make a decision on whether to advance or retreat. "Jagan," Count Carrad called out. There were always demons whose names were mentioned in discussions about those who were the most famous, aside from the 3 dukes of Helmuth. One of them had been the depraved Oberon, who had shown absolute domination while living in the same era as the 3 dukes. So, Jagan had proven himself to be powerful just with the feat of defeating his father. This very Jagan was currently engaged in a battle with someone, and shockingly he was being forced back. Jagan had always been a horrible and hideous creature by nature, and his body had always reeked of blood. However, right now there was a different type of energy emanating from Jagan. It was an instinctive and ominous feeling. Count Carrad knew the origin of the ominous feeling. It was the Demon King of Destruction. Consequently, the aura emanating from Jagan conveyed a sense of despair even to other demon folks. Moreover, Jagan did not distinguish between allies and enemies. Unlike the elves, the beast folk did not receive the love of spirits during their lives. nor did they have a vast knowledge of mana or an incredible ability to have offspring like humans. Instead, beast folks were blessed with a strong body. Although they lacked control over mana, their robust constitution made them capable of enduring most attacks, and their incredible regenerative powers allowed them to recover from even the most severe injuries. Count Carrot had been taught about the history of the beast folk when he was a child. According to legend, the beast folk had succumbed to their primal instincts and become ruthless predators during the reign of the depraved Oberon. They had indulged in flesh and blood during years of war, with an insatiable hunger for slaughter and carnage that seemed to never be satiated. However, the beast folk needed more power to continue their campaign of bloodshed, so they turned to the demon kings for aid. By making contracts with the demon kings, even the beast folk could learn to control dark power, and they chose to align themselves with the demon king of fury. Then when fury fell, they turned their allegiance to the demon king of destruction. The beast folk of previous generations had betrayed their own kind, shifting their allegiance twice to satisfy their craving for slaughter and predation. It was natural that such habits had been passed down to Jagan. Jagan was hungry, and the reason for Jagan's hunger was evident. He had lost an excessive amount of blood and regenerated at an alarming rate. Eating was the only solution to satiate his hunger. Jagan did not fight against his instincts. Instead, he followed in the footsteps of his predecessors. The ball of flesh squirmed in the rippling darkness. Count Carrot had not earned his title through mere luck or chance. He had become the man he was today by winning numerous battles of all kinds. From territorial disputes to ranking battles and other forms of combat, he had honed his skills as a seasoned veteran. As such, his instincts were sharp and keen, warning him of the quiet and malevolent energy radiating from the ball of malice. He had no time to shout a warning or to order his flying steed. Instead, Count Carrot immediately jumped off the back of his flying demonic beast. There were others by his side, demon folks who had guarded his side as his escorts for a long time. Even so, Count Carrot did not hesitate to jump alone. Count Carrot understood the gravity of the situation. A single moment of hesitation could mean his demise, and his intuition proved him right. Almost instantaneously, the mass of flesh and darkness, Jagan, morphed into a colossal mouth and devoured both the demonic beast and Count Carrot's guards in one swift motion. Their deaths were swift and dreadful, leaving them no time to even cry out in terror before their demise. The dark power of destruction obliterated and consumed its victims, erasing them entirely from existence. However, Jagan still wasn't full yet. Whoosh! Jagan unleashed dozens of tendrils of darkness, each one accompanied by writhing tentacles of flesh that thrashed toward the crumbling city. The fleshy appendages searched their surroundings with gaping jaws, akin to a pack of snakes on the hunt for their next meal. Cannibalism among demon folks wasn't a rare thing, and it had been typical in the past. Humans did not grow stronger by eating their own kind unless it was accompanied by black magic or sorcery. However, it was different from demon folks. For them, the strongest path to power was to cannibalize other demon folks. Although there were risks involved, many were willing to take them during times of war and strife, as murder and violence were commonplace for demon folks. In the demon world, the strongest path to power was often paved with the flesh and blood of their own kind. He's coming, Jagan thought. Although Jagan was faithful to his instincts, his sense of reason remained unshakable. As such, he calmly reviewed his previous battle, and he couldn't deny that it had been one-sided. Jagan had been strong since birth, a natural predator. He had never lost a battle, and he had never failed to kill after setting his target on his prey. He ate when he was hungry and he drank when he was thirsty. Yet it wasn't working out as usual against his current prey. Jagan had fought, yet he failed to win. He had wanted to kill, yet he failed to kill. He was hungry and thirsty, yet he failed to eat and failed to drink. Jagan had never experienced such shackles until today. Eugene Lionheart was approaching him now. Jagan had never imagined such a scenario, even in his wildest dreams. He had known that the Black Dragon wouldn't be present for the invasion. So he had thought he would simply eat his fill. He had not expected a battle that could give him pleasure. So he couldn't deny that the current situation had caught him completely unaware. The Black Dragon wasn't here, but Eugene Lionheart was, and Jagan had suffered a totally one-sided humiliation from the human. Jargon had been decapitated and his head had been sent flying away. After preying on some demon folks and devouring them, Jagan withdrew the dark power. He was receiving incredible power by using it, but he knew that the dark power would continue to eat away at his body in exchange, so he couldn't keep using it. There was a sudden roar and Jagan had to struggle to come to his senses. The collision sent Jagan flying far back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was truly unbelievable, but this was the truth. Rubble collapsed on top of Jagan and threatened to bury him alive, but the dark power of destruction surrounding him simply annihilated the wreckage. Eugene suppressed his nausea and glared at Jagan while raising WE. The wind suddenly intensified and a storm began to build with Eugene at its center. Moreover, this wasn't regular wind but rather waves and waves of mana crafted into a storm conducted by the storm sword. With a downward slash of the sword, Eugene directed the full force of the storm toward Jagan. The blow brought the entire city down, engulfing the demon folks who had failed to escape, as well as the demon folks ransacking the city and slaughtering its residents. Nevertheless, their fate was none of Eugene's business. Rather, he was focused on Jagan and only Jagan. Eugene glared at Jagan as the beastfolk raised himself within the storm. All the feathers scattered in the surroundings were capturing Jagan's minute movements. The dark power of destruction showed off its presence even while Jagan was caught up in the storm of mana. Boom! Jagan stomped his feet, causing the ground to sink and the storm to dissipate. Then Eugene quickly switched out the WD for the holy sword before diving toward the ground. Just before Eugene's sword and Jagan's claws made contact, a collision of light and dark power erupted. The holy sword emitted a powerful light and resisted the dark power of destruction, but despite its efforts, it failed to gain any advantage. Jagan's power, which belonged to the strongest demon king, was simply too great. If the light and the dark power were to collide head-on, the light would be devoured and the holy sword would wither away. However, Eugene was twisting and turning the blade at just the right moments to deflect Jagan's blows and chip away at his dark power. Meanwhile, Count Karad was muttering under his breath during his struggle to maintain his footing as the two monsters clashed. "Monsters," he whispered to himself while taking in the sight of the destruction around him. Hundreds of demon folks had formed an army to invade the city, but now most of them, as well as the city's residents numbering several times that of the demon folks, lay dead. The majority of them had been caught in the crossfire between the two powerful beings. The clashing of the two opposing forces was a deadly bane for the demons, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The dark power of destruction was indiscriminate in its destruction, mercilessly devouring anything that crossed its path. On the other hand, the radiant glow emanating from the holy sword was a death sentence for the demon folks, for it had the power to purify and vanquish them. To survive, the demon folks had to flee and create as much distance from the two monstrous powers as possible. "I'm not being pushed back, but I can't grab the upper hand either," Eugene remarked inwardly. Eugene had swung the holy sword hundreds of times in a short moment. He had slashed the coat of dark power surrounding Jagan multiple times but had never managed to reach the beastfolk's fur. Even the light of the holy sword, which typically purged the dark power of demons with ease, was ineffective against Jagan. It must be because of the Demon King, Eugene surmised. The Demon King whose power Jagan was using was not just any Demon King but the strongest Demon King. So, even though the holy sword wasn't lacking in any way, it simply wasn't powerful enough to blow away the dark power of destruction. However, the holy sword allowed Eugene to hold his own against Jagan. Simply holding the holy sword allowed Eugene's sanity to be protected against the ominous and insane power of darkness. Moreover, the light of the holy sword repelled the dark power and prevented it from eroding Eugene's mana. Nevertheless, what Eugene needed wasn't a protective light. He needed destruction in the shape of a sword, an object that annihilated everything it reflected, the moonlight sword. Eugene stepped back from the rampaging malice and placed his hand inside his cloak. He had never taken out the moonlight sword ever since recovering one of its pieces from the mine. Eugene had judged it to be too dangerous, and if truth be told, he wasn't confident in having complete control over the moonlight sword. Yes, he could swing it, but once he did, he wasn't sure he could control the power to specify exactly how much power it would contain and how much it would destroy. It had been the same in the mine. When he gathered the fragments together, Eugene had definitely been holding the moonlight sword, and he had not been intending to destroy the mine at all. Rather, he had been trying to keep the situation under control. Yet he had failed miserably. Eugene had done his best to suppress the light, but it had gone out of control, sweeping everything around him and completely destroying the mine. Fortunately, he had not needed to use the moonlight sword during his time in Helmuth, so he had been intending on grasping control over the weapon later in a safer place. Control. Eugene didn't bother hindering his lips from twitching into a smile. Rather, he grinned while pulling out the pommel of the moonlight sword. This was an opportunity. Truth be told, Eugene was curious. He wondered how powerful the moonlight sword had become after it was restored partially. 300 years ago, the moonlight sword's power had not been inferior to the dark power of the demon kings. I don't expect the same power from the current form though. Eugene unveiled the sword from its ordinary sheath. Before recovering a fragment at the mine, the moonlight sword had been a sword of light erupting from a small fragment of its blade, but it was different now. With the addition of the fragment recovered from the mine, the moonlight sword's blade had been restored to about a third of its original form. The missing piece of the blade had been replaced by pale moonlight. Before recovering an additional fragment, the light of the moonlight sword had rampaged of its own will, but now, it extended straight like a polished blade. Nonetheless, that was only on the surface. The outrageous power contained in the sword still craved to run wild, and the hand holding the pommel of the sword throbbed. An eerie feeling washed over Eugene as he raised the moonlight sword to his side. Good. The moonlight flickered. There was no need to use the empty sword or sword force. In the first place, it was impossible to imbue such techniques with the moonlight sword. In its essence, the moonlight sword was destruction in the form of a sword. It could not be used with anything else as it ripped, destroyed, and exterminated everything in its path. Even Vermouth had failed to utilize any of his techniques with the moonlight sword, and in fact there had been no need to do so. Simply swinging the moonlight sword proved sufficient for Eugene's situation. The malicious dark power was engulfed by moonlight, and the malicious energy which destroyed and devoured everything failed to overcome the moonlight. Rather, the dark power of destruction seemingly struggled in the moonlight before melting away. Jagan instinctively leaped back as the moonlight sword drew a crescent through the air. Nothing was left where the wave of crescent had passed through. What is this? Jagan felt his hair stand on end. His lips felt dry, he felt goosebumps rising on his skin, and his heart was thumping rapidly. He felt confused by the strange emotions that grasped his heart. Jagan stared at Eugene and the moonlight contained in his hand. What exactly was the light Eugene held? Was it sword force? Was it magic? Divine power? Oh, it was nothing. That light was nothing, but at the same time, it was a power that destroyed everything. Jagan instinctively comprehended the nature of the light, and he felt a strange sense of foreboding about it. Jagan let rip a roar before bursting into the air. Fleeing with his tail tucked behind his back wasn't an option, so he attempted to alleviate his fear with a mighty roar. Rumbly, pale moonlight and the dark power collided. Eugene wielded his sword to the best of his ability without using any techniques. He slashed through the dark power that threatened to destroy him and stabbed in what he deemed to be the right directions. Even though the moonlight sword was an absurdly powerful tool, it didn't mean Eugene could swing it recklessly. A sword was only good as its user, and it would better reach its target with sophisticated swings. He swung the sword with precision and care, directing it toward his opponent in calculated movements. The city, or rather the world, began to collapse. This place was no longer the dragon demon castle from before. The ruins were quickly transformed into an empty wasteland, and the ground was turned upside down. The moonlight sword left nothing but destruction in its wake, obliterating even the ground it passed over as Jagan sprinted tirelessly within its glow. The castle was slowly being cut down with each powerful slash of the absurd weapon. The ground was sinking slowly, or so Jagan thought. He realized that he had been mistaken about that when he leaped high into the sky. It wasn't only that the ground beneath the dragon demon castle was being slashed to nothingness. Rather, the castle was crashing to the ground beneath. The castle's core had been overloaded due to the unceasing waves of destruction. The dragon demon castle wasn't plummeting, but it was gradually descending in altitude. Eugene wasn't fond of the slow descent. He wished that the castle would go crashing down on the territory of Carabloom instead. Then Eugene flashed a wicked grin as he extended his fiery wing, causing Jagan to instinctively retreat with a flinch. Nevertheless, as Jagan observed the situation, he found that something was different this time. Every time Eugene unleashed his wing of fire in the past, There had been disastrous consequences. Yet as Jagan watched warily now, nothing seemed to be happening. "What did you do?" asked Jagan. "I destroyed it," answered Eugene with a smile. Boom. The dragon demon castle started to quake, even though Eugene had not swung the moonlight sword. The earthquake divided the land beneath Eugene and Jagan into several pieces, signaling the acceleration of the dragon demon castle's descent. Chapter 266, Jagan 6. As if to prove his words, Eugene wielded his blade while twisting his waist. A burst of moonlight swept through the air, but Jagan chose to jump to invade the blow instead of engaging it head-on. Triggered by the destruction of its core, the fall of the dragon demon castle had begun. The massive structure, which had been suspended in the air for centuries, was now disintegrating into countless fragments that rained down on the ground below. Jagan, moving with incredible speed, navigated through the chaos with his kicks shattering the debris that threatened to impede his progress. Furthermore, he wasn't simply jumping. The dark power surrounding him bent to his will and formed into the same shape as before when he had been devouring countless demons. The same tendrils that had allowed him to consume the multitudes of demons earlier sprouted from his back and lashed out at Eugene with deadly force. It looked as if there were dozens of snakes attached to the back of a giant bear, but it wasn't a charming appearance by any means. Eugene clicked his tongue in annoyance and activated his prominence ability to augment his speed even further. Though his lightning flash ability had already granted him incredible swiftness, the added boost from Prominence's wings allowed him to move with even greater velocity. Despite the breakneck pace, Eugene maintained absolute control over his movements, ensuring that he didn't lose command over his own speed like before. Was Jagan moving too fast for Eugene's eyes? The very notion of that was preposterous. Eugene had absolute control over the space around him, and he was fully aware of Jagan's every move, even those beyond his line of sight. While he gazed beyond the writhing mass of serpents, he watched Jagan gather the dark power onto his massive claws. A smile spread across Eugene's face as he deftly gripped the hilt of his moonlight sword in reverse. A sudden burst of purple lightning illuminated the dim glow of the moonlight, shattering the accumulation of dark power that Jagan had been assembling. Reacting swiftly, Jagan severed the portion of his power that was being eroded. He was still unable to discern the identity of the ominous light. The Demon King of Destruction was the strongest Demon King and even more powerful than the Demon King of Incarceration. Yet the power granted to him by the Demon King of Destruction was being overpowered by the pale light. "Boss?" one of Jagan's subordinates called out with a voice barely audible over the cacophony of destruction. Despite the devastation that had befallen them, including the aftermath of the fierce battle between Eugene and Jagan, not all of the demons had perished, and this subordinate of Jagan's that had managed to survive was struggling amid the debris. In lieu of a verbal response, Jagan simply gestured with one of his tendrils, signaling his intent. Jagan's decision to employ one of his subordinates as a shield had nothing to do with hunger. It was a strategic maneuver to block the oncoming onslaught of moonlight. The unfortunate demon had been a skilled and powerful fighter, yet he perished instantaneously under the intensity of the attack, unable to even utter a final cry before being consumed by the moonlit energy. Jagan was convinced once more after seeing his subordinate die. The only thing that allowed him to stay on an equal footing with Eugene was the dark power of destruction covering his body. Without it, it was abundantly clear that Jagan would have met the same ill-fated demise as his comrade long before now due to being unable to withstand the full brunt of Eugene's deadly strikes. "You," Jagan called out. Boom. Jagan took a large step back. Though the massive structure was hurtling toward the ground at an accelerated pace, Jagan had more pressing matters to attend to. It was clear that Carabloom would be devastated once the large landmass crashed onto the ground. However, the fate of Carabloom was of no concern to him. A mere fall would not be sufficient to end his life. The only thing he cared about was what Eugene had said. The human had threatened that he would have Jagan dead before the castle reached the ground, and Jagan could not help but feel that it had not been simply an arrogant provocation. "Perhaps." "What are you?" asked Jagan. He was indifferent to others and faithful to his own instincts. However, be that as it may, Jagan could not help but wonder about Eugene. There were too many unanswered questions and too many curiosities. Eugene Lionheart was hailed as the descendant of the legendary Great Vermouth and the hero and recognized by the Holy Sword as well. But was that truly all that made him so formidable? Jagan couldn't fathom how a mere lineage and a holy relic could confer such immense strength. After all, Jagan himself was a force to be reckoned with, and few demons in Helmuth, aside from the three dukes, could boast of having accumulated as much power as he had. Despite his considerable power, Jagan had been unable to land a single effective strike against Eugene in their fierce battle. He had tried everything in his arsenal in an attempt to overwhelm Eugene with his destructive might, but it had all been to no avail. Not even a drop of blood had spilled from Eugene. Even after invoking the power of destruction, all Jagan had managed to do in the battle was physically push Eugene back, and even then he had failed to penetrate Eugene's defenses. Was it because of that mysterious sword? Still, Jagan could not entirely attribute the situation to the sword. The balance of their battle had been consistent from the beginning until now. Jagan had failed to overwhelm Eugene even before he had taken out the Moonlight Sword. So what was it then? It was the strange way Eugene moved. He moved in an almost otherworldly way. Every step he took was precise, skilled, and calculated. It made his opponent seem like a child, and indeed, Jagan felt like a child in Eugene's hands. Eugene's composure only added to the effect. He had been showing a leisurely attitude for the entire duration of the battle. It was as if he had been born for this moment, and nothing could shake his resolve. Jagan expressed his disbelief. "I find it hard to believe that you are Eugene Lionheart." It was true that he had never met Eugene before, nor had he taken any interest in Eugene despite having heard his name in the past. The reason was that Jagan never looked down, only up. He gazed at the three dukes of Helmuth, the three mages of incarceration, and perhaps the knights who were reputed to be the best of the best across the continent, if he bothered to turn his gaze in that direction. Eugene Lionheart was simply too young. "Are you the Great Vermouth?" asked Jagan. He knew it was ridiculous, but he couldn't help but ask. There were simply too many similarities between Eugene and the Great Vermouth. No, to be completely honest, it boiled down to a matter of pride. Jagan could not believe that he could be overwhelmed unless his opponent was hiding a secret like that. "I cut off your father's head several times too." Eugene's words had not really registered during Jagan's bout of anger earlier, but now they resurfaced. It provided Jagan with some certainty of his suspicions. "Hamel," answered Eugene truthfully. "Hamel Dinah's." It was inconsequential for Eugene to reveal his true identity now, as only Jagan would be aware of it, and Jagan was destined to meet his demise soon. Jagan's eyes trembled after hearing Eugene's answer. There was no way he didn't know the name Hamel Dinah's. Hamel of Massacre. A distorted smile hung around Jagan's mouth. However, he did not fall into denial, and he did not sigh in resignation either. Rather, his opponent's identity relieved him and gave him joy. Although Jagan's dead father had never indulged him with any old stories, Hamel's name was more renowned in Helmuth than it was in the continent. Nevertheless, Jagan didn't bother expressing any sense of honor toward Eugene. Instead, he kicked off from the wreckage and propelled himself toward Eugene like a meteorite. Eugene anticipated Jagan's movements and adjusted his stance accordingly. Black blood splashed, and Jagan's severed arm fell to the ground with a thud as the clash between the dark power and the moonlight created a gory spectacle. Jagan was both surprised and amazed that his arm had been severed in a single blow. Despite this, he quickly regained his composure and focused on his remaining arm, channeling all the dark power he could muster into it. The explosion of dark power engulfed Eugene, and in that short moment, Jagan regenerated his lost arm. With each swing of his arms, Jagan's sharp claws sent forth deadly attacks toward Eugene, and the debris surrounding them was sliced into minuscule pieces. As Jagan searched for his opponent, a sense of unease crept up on him. Suddenly, he looked up to see a building hurtling down toward him. A sign displaying the name of the establishment was clearly visible. It read Jabella Steakhouse. Boom! Jagan thrust his fist at the plummeting building and caused it to shatter, forming a cloud of dust and concrete. "Roar!" He howled as he stood in the middle of the hazy dust and wiped away the obscuring dust particles from his surroundings. However, although there was no more dust, small black dots materialized in their place. The dots started to merge into a bigger form, and even though the result was only a black lump the size of a fist, Jagan could feel a formidable power emanating from it. Holy shit! Jagan had always been the one to shock others with his power and strength, but this time it was different. He was appalled by Eugene. As Jagan faced the oncoming violence from Eugene, he couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. Rumbly. Myriads of black spots washed over Jagan. Kara. Jagan's body was covered in wounds and his mouth was filled with blood. He had focused all his energy on defending himself, but it was still not enough. The dark power of destruction was poison for demons. Despite this, Jagan had constantly relied on it to fight while relying on his ability to regenerate, and in the process he had sustained injuries all over his body, including his neck and arms. Additionally, some of his dark power had been nullified by the Moonlight Sword. Jagan stabilized his stumbling body and raised his fist. However, he still could not see Eugene. Had Eugene hidden his presence with that damned leap once more? Or were Jagan's senses becoming dull and his vision blurry? Jagan swallowed a mouthful of blood before swinging his fists recklessly. Death was coming for him. Despite his doubts, Jagan's senses were still fully operational, and his intuition was sending out a warning. However, he chose to trust his instincts and he attempted to counter the oncoming attack by reaching out. It turned out to be a mistake, as he should have avoided the attack entirely instead of defending or retaliating against it. Jagan's attempt to block the Moonlight Sword with his dark power was in vain, as the crescent slash passed through him, slicing off his right hand in the process. Nevertheless, he realized his mistake too late and was left with no choice but to suffer the consequences. Jagan hurriedly reached out for his severed right hand, but the crescent light descended rapidly, slicing off the rest of his right arm from the shoulder. I can still regenerate. It would just regenerate a little slower, but it was entirely possible. Jagan extended his remaining hand. In the end, his opponent was still human. No matter how strong his opponent was, and even if he was the infamous Hamel, he was human. Just once. All he needed was to make contact just once. As soon as Jagan made contact, he could crush the human's body. Regardless of whatever methods of defense the human had, whether it was an aura shield or something else, Jagan could crush it using his own brute strength and the dark power of destruction. Feeling hopeful, Jagan lunged with his fist. However, Jagan's ploy was obvious, but Eugene wasn't heartless enough to ignore Jagan's desperate move. Eugene's lips curled up into a twisted smile, and he responded in kind with his own fist. As the two fists neared each other, Eugene slowly opened his fist. Jagan saw a white light blooming from Eugene's hand. The glistening figures of light clung to one another, and within the round sphere, black spots began to appear. Eclipse, Eugene's mocking whisper dug into Jagan's ears. As Eugene hurled the miniature sun toward him, it promptly turned completely black. Boom. It was as if the sun had descended into the atmosphere. Jagan had taken Eclipse head-on. This wasn't a weaker version conjured by Prominence, but the skill in its full brilliance. The skill's enormous power completely blew Jagan away, along with his consciousness. Jagan tumbled through the air and crashed into the ground with tremendous force. When he finally came to, he was coughing up dirt and debris, still feeling disoriented from the impact. Looking up from the hole he had created, his vision was limited to a narrow view of the sky above. Eugene's figure loomed overhead, and Jagan braced himself as a swarm of black sunspots descended upon him. With a burst of energy, Jagan shielded his head and arms from the incoming attack. His movements were restricted by the unrelenting explosions that eradicated the ground around him. Yet despite having more space to move, his freedom was completely robbed by the constant explosions. I'm going to die. This realization struck Jagan once more. His death felt near and so much more real than before. Jagan coughed up blood while forcing his eyes open. His vision was red and black. Nevertheless, Jagan believed that he still had one more chance remaining to fight back as soon as the bombing ended, or rather, when his opponent attempted to confirm his death. He imagined that moment. The battle had been one-sided, a fight that had pushed him to the brink of death, but he would survive in the end. Jagan would remember it as the toughest battle in his life. Today would be etched as a monumental day, a day when he neared death for the first time in his life, a day that would allow him to leap to greater heights. He would relish his victory after devouring Eugene's, or rather the terrible Hamel's heart. Jagan's line of vision was now illuminated. The red color from his blood and the darkness from the blindness were gone from his vision. Jagan's eyes were filled with only the eerie and murky moonlight. It was as if he were gazing upon the full moon. He had been gunning for the opportunity to fight back and win this battle, but he had not imagined how he would actually do it. In the end, it turned out to be a greedy and hopeful thought. Jagan chuckled and dipped his head. He was finally forced into resignation. He knew he could not win this battle. Now he was going to die today. Eugene had been right. The Dragon Demon Castle was still in descent, far from crashing down into the land below. Meanwhile, Jagan had been trapped in the ground and he would soon die. "Hamel of Massacre," Jagan called out. His gaze was fixed on the moonlight sword piercing through his chest. He had never been able to get a proper look at it before, as the intense and ominous light that surrounded the blade was too blinding. Nonetheless, now with the sword lodged in his heart, he had no choice but to study it. "What is this sword?" Jagan asked. The moonlight permeated his body, causing it to gradually disappear into nothingness. He had long exhausted the dark power surrounding him. "The moonlight sword," answered Eugene. "As expected," responded Jagan with a chuckle. He had heard about it from Oberon during his childhood. It was the most horrible yet powerful sword that Vermouth had used. It was an ominous sword that was unfit to be called the hero's sword. The moonlight sword was a sword that threatened to destroy everything in existence, and it had disappeared from the Lionheart family. "What kind of existence is the Demon King of Destruction?" asked Eugene without pulling out the sword. Jagan was the most prominent of the few vassals that the Demon King of Destruction had, so there was a chance that he knew something about the Demon King of Destruction. "The Demon King of Destruction is an unfathomable being," said Jagan. His lips curved into a smile as blood filled his mouth and dripped down his chin. He had encountered the Demon King of Destruction once in a deserted temple, and knelt before him to sign a contract with him. However, he had never truly seen the Demon King's face, convinced that he couldn't bring himself to look up at the latter. "So, even you don't know anything about him?" asked Eugene. "I am not a special existence to the Demon King of Destruction," answered Jagan. The Demon King of Destruction did not care about the deaths of his vassals. In fact, most demon kings were similar in this regard except for the Demon King of Fury. Nevertheless, if a demon king had a liking for one of their vassals, they could well provide them with enough power to keep them alive. However, the Demon King of Destruction had done no such thing, and Jagan had not expected anything either. "I wonder if even the other demon kings would understand destruction," muttered Jagan while vomiting blood. "Hamel of Massacre. I knew my father, Oberon." "Yes. Was I stronger than my father?" asked Jagan. It was his final question and he was sincerely curious. He had killed his father with his own hands and he was convinced that he was stronger. Still, he wanted to hear the answer from Hamel, who had battled against him as well as his father in his prime. "I think you might be a little bit stronger," said Eugene with a grin while pulling out his sword. "But I can't say for sure. I'm much stronger than I was back then." It wasn't a satisfactory answer. However, Jagan did not have the energy to ask another question. Even if he did, he would not be able to ask it anyway, as Eugene proceeded to slit his throat with the moonlight sword. Chapter 267. My Hamel won. Rhaenyra stood frozen in fear, her body trembling with anxiety as she stood before the Dragon Demon Castle's core. The core had been obliterated in a sudden and violent explosion, but she remained rooted to the spot, unable to flee. Despite her overwhelming desire to escape, something held her there, an unexplainable force that kept her in place. It was true that the core had been shattered, but it was not completely destroyed. Instead, the explosion seemed almost controlled, as only about half of the core had been blown away, leaving the rest intact. The backbone of the system had been completely wrecked, leaving the Dragon Demon Castle falling at breakneck speed toward the ground below. Despite this, Rhaenyra was not able to breathe a sigh of relief. The core, though barely functioning, still existed and was bound to her in some way. Its presence ensured she could not simply walk away from the disaster unfolding before her eyes. Her bondage meant that Rhysakia had been much more obsessed with keeping Rhaenyra contained than with the safety of the Dragon Demon Castle. Even if the core was partially destroyed and could no longer perform its functions, Rhysakia had been determined not to liberate Rhaenyra until the end. In a way, it was a curse. A curse to ensure that Rhaenyra would meet her end with the Dragon Demon Castle if the situation ever went out of his control. Rhaenyra was oblivious to her father's malicious intentions, and she had no desire to entertain such thoughts. Instead, she remained rooted to the spot, trembling with fear as the castle hurtled towards its inevitable collapse. Explosions echoed through the city, not far from where she stood, adding to the chaos and fear that gripped her heart. The once great city of the Dragon Demon Castle was disintegrating before her eyes. The sprawling metropolis and the massive landmass on which it stood was breaking apart like brittle crackers, their fragments scattering before exploding into nothing more than dust. Gulp. Rhaenyra swallowed her saliva unknowingly, and she could see the fleeting image of the intruder in the chain of explosions and destruction. Although Rhaenyra wasn't familiar with battles, she understood that what she saw was nothing more than one-sided violence. Rhaenyra's draconic instincts screamed at her, warning her that the creature was not one she should ever engage in battle. And yet she watched in astonishment as the monster was being pummeled into submission, thrown into the air, having its arms severed, bleeding profusely before being hurled into the rubble of a towering building, and finally, he's dead. The monster's presence disappeared. She could no longer feel the ominous power responsible for raising goosebumps on her entire body. Rhaenyra took several steps back with a pale expression. She knew the unknown intruder was strong, but she had never imagined he was this powerful. It's falling. Boom. The wreckage of the Dragon Demon Castle shook violently. Rhaenyra embraced the remainder of the core with a tearful face. The inevitable was now only seconds away. Within a dozen heartbeats, the shattered remains of the once mighty castle would collide with the fief of Cara Bloom, unleashing a catastrophic event of immense proportions. What are you doing? Fush. Lightning flames crackled, and Eugene appeared out of thin air, having leaped to a feather before asking a question with a tired expression. He had replaced ignition with prominence, but the strain left him depleted even with the Agarotha's ring taking on the resulting burden. So he was exhausted and fatigued, albeit not comparable to the aftermath of using ignition. Rhaenyra let out a whimper, her voice trembling with fear as she spoke. "Tis lady, can't run away," she said, her words barely audible. Eugene shifted his gaze towards the broken core and let out a vain laugh. With a burst of sword force, he blasted away the remaining fragments of the core in a deafening boom. Heek! The resulting explosion startled Rhaenyra, and she shrunk back while covering her head with her arms. Kia! But instead of comforting her or giving an explanation, Eugene made a move. He took the flailing body of Rhaenyra in one arm, then unfolded the burning wing of Prominence. In a flash, Eugene made his escape from the Dragon Demon Castle, soaring high into the sky. Rhaenyra clung to his arm with a vice-like grip, her screams piercing the air as the incredible acceleration threatened to overwhelm her with terror. After the two of them rose to a suitable height, Eugene looked down at the falling debris of the castle. "Wow!" he exclaimed with a smile of unspeakable satisfaction and happiness. Boom! What came next was a spectacle of unimaginable proportions. A colossal explosion that shook the very foundations of reality. The tremors were so violent that they seemed to make the sky above quiver in response. The Dragon Demon Castle had fallen from a great height, and upon impact, it unleashed a catastrophic blast that was akin to a meteor shower conjured by an archwizard, tearing through the heart of Cara Bloom. Cara Bloom was utterly defenseless against an attack from above, with no means to protect itself against the catastrophic impact of the falling Dragon Demon Castle. It was impossible to say whether the demon folks had managed to evacuate in time, but the ensuing chaos was swift and merciless. The remains of the castle rained down upon the city with brutal force, obliterating everything in its path. The sheer impact of the collisions from the castle remains was enough to cause the very ground beneath to vanish, while the ensuing shockwaves rippled outwards and destroyed everything in their wake. Boom! The explosions and the tremors continued without stopping, just as Eugene had intended. He had carved out the large landmass into pieces for a reason, to maximize the damage it would cause when it crashed down below. "I should have brought snacks," commented Eugene. "I have some," responded Mare while poking her head out of the cloak. She handed Eugene a box of popcorn while taking a glance at the disaster taking place below. As Cara Bloom burned and crumbled into nothingness before their very eyes, they floated and watched, casually munching on popcorn. Despite the lack of refreshments, Eugene had no trouble stuffing his face with the savory kernels, washing them down with hearty gulps of air. "This lady's territory," called out Rhaenyra with despair. "Your territory? Where?" mocked Eugene. "That's right. How is it your territory? It was you who decided to abandon your territory and run away in the first place. said Mare. I was because the situation could not have been avoided. This lady wanted to fulfill her duties as the Lord, but she could not help it with the power she held. This lady did not run away but took a step back for the sake of the future, retorted Rhaenyra, making excuses while stealing glances at the popcorn. She was a dragon, a creature close to the gods. Dragons did not need to eat since they could maintain their existence with mana. Even so, they ate for the sake of enjoyment. Rhaenyra had also tasted many dishes over the 200 years she lived in the secluded palace. However, as a dragon and the daughter of the Black Dragon, Rhaenyra was a proud, dignified creature. The popcorn that Eugene and Mare so casually enjoyed appeared to her as something insignificant and unpalatable, fit only for commoners and peasants. Under normal circumstances, she would not have even given it a second glance. However, she couldn't help but notice that Eugene and Mare appeared to be really enjoying themselves with the popcorn. The savory and salty aroma and the crisp crunches drew her curiosity. That looks quite good. If you offer it to this lady as a tribute, this lady will be very satisfied. Rhaenyra finally spoke up after some contemplation. What are you saying? You're not getting any since your attitude is horrible. Despair fell in Rhaenyra's eyes at the firm refusal. She felt more sadness to be denied popcorn than to see the land being destroyed. After all, she had never been attached to the flying landmass anyways. Tisk. Eugene squinted while watching the destruction take place. The dust and the destruction from the initial crash were being halted in an unnatural fashion at a certain boundary. Looking down at the scene from such a height, it was clear that there was a clear boundary restricting further spread. Eugene observed that the destruction caused by the collision of the Dragon Demon Castle with the fief of Carabloom was contained within a specific boundary. While the city was wiped out completely, the surrounding area remained unscathed. The ground shook violently, but not a single tree fell or a crack appeared outside the boundary. He could guess the reason. Someone had purposely set up a barrier to prevent the destruction from crossing the boundary. Huff. Huff. He was alive. That was the only thing he could think of. Although his left arm had been swept away by the explosion, he was still alive. In fact, an arm was a cheap price to pay to have survived that ridiculous fight. Even though his arm wasn't regenerating instantly after being consumed by the strange and sinister power Jagan had used, it would regenerate sometime soon. In other words, he had suffered no physical damage. However, he had lost other things, and this made Count Carrot despair. He had waged so much on the war, and most of the wealth he had collected over his lifetime had been used to hire Jagan and the mercenaries. In addition, he had invested all of the elite soldiers under his command, including his personal guards. A brilliant future would have been waiting for him if he had won. He would have gotten possession of the Dragon Demon Castle, which was created by the Black Dragon himself, as well as the giant mine in Carabloom and the tribute offered by the dwarves working the mine. However, everything was gone. Jagan was dead, so he had no one to fight with the Black Dragon in case he returned. He had never even gotten a glimpse of the Dragon Duchess' face. Everything, including the Dragon Demon Castle, Carabloom, and the mine, was gone. This is different from what you said. Count Carrot sobbed while clutching the dirt with his enormous hand. But he wasn't talking to himself. A short distance from the Count, right in front of the boundary preventing the spread of destruction, stood a woman in a bright dress, completely out of step with the devastation a few steps ahead of her. "Weren't you the one who got the wrong idea?" said the woman. Morgiabella did not bother glancing back at the Count. Instead, she observed the continuing destruction with interest, as if she were possessed. "Count, I am not your patron. The reason I told you that Rhysakia would not become involved in this war was a tiny favor I showed you as someone who stands in a very high place, looking down at you eagerly trying to climb." In the early hours of the morning, Morgiabella had reached out to Count Carrot through a dream. The Count had been feeling uneasy after failing to persuade Jagan to join his cause, and the sudden attack on the Dragon Demon Castle had only added to his worries. Despite it being just a hatchling in the castle, he couldn't shake off the fear of the Black Dragon appearing, turning the tides of the battle and destroying his land. Morgiabella had dispelled his worries. After making a sudden appearance in his dream, Nor informed Count Carrot that Rhysakia would not be intervening in the war. Thanks to the information, the Count was able to shake off his anxiety and hesitation and ended up joining the daring ambush that Jagan had planned. "I never promised your victory, and I did not lie. Rhysakia did not intervene in this war," said Noir. She turned her enchanted gaze upward, staring at Eugene Lionheart standing high in the sky. The black dragon did not appear, but Eugene Lionheart, the hero, was there. Your Excellency. Didn't you know that Eugene Lionheart would intervene in the war? Asked Count Carrot. Noir did not give an answer. She still stood with her back to the Count, and she never bothered sparing him even a glance. Count Carrot felt deceived and angry. You are a Duke of Helmuth. Even so, you stayed silent, knowing that the hero, the enemy of Helmuth, had become involved in a war between the territory of demons. This is going to cause a huge ruckus. I do not intend to stay silent about this matter, said Count Carrot. You're a fool, aren't you? Morgiabella burst out laughing. Even if you think so, you shouldn't say such things right in front of me. Are you so desperate and frustrated that your brain isn't functioning properly? She was right, and Count Carrot hurriedly covered his mouth with shock. You shouldn't regret having said that. Even if you didn't say it, and even if you didn't mean it, I would have done the same thing to you, said Noir. What? I'm saying that nothing important happened, Noir replied without bothering to turn around. This is what wars are usually like. Two sides collide and one side ends up losing everything. These days, demon folks want a clean, calculated war, calling it territorial wars, ranking disputes, or whatnot. They want a clean trophy from a rank-and-file war. It wasn't like this in the past, you know. The only trophies to be gained were intangible honor, a decapitated head, a permanent scar, things like that. Count Carrot faltered and took several steps back. Did I sound too old-fashioned? Well, what can I do? I am an old demon. Of course, I think that a territory would make a great trophy. But I don't really like your mentality of get something for nothing. Count, you wanted the Dragon Demon Castle in Carabloom in perfect condition, right? You can't want something like that. The Dragon Demon Castle, Carabloom, the city, and the mine, everything was created by Raizakia. They are all fundamentally dyed in Raizakia's color. The Count turned around and started sprinting away at full speed. Did you really think that you could own all of it? Even though everyone would be reminded of Raizakia when they heard about the Dragon Demon Castle? No, that's just not right. You should have planned to wipe everything out and claim the wasteland as yours. Then you would have a blank canvas to color to your liking, something that belongs to you fundamentally, your territory. That would have become your territory. I did that too, right? After winning a battle against Iris, the Abyssal Princess, Noir claimed Iris's territory, the Forest of Dark Shadows, as her own. The first thing she did was to uproot all the trees. She then turned the forest into a jungle of concrete. As a result, people no longer thought of the Forest of Black Shadows when referring to that territory. Instead, the things that occupied the land included the giant Giabella face, a beautiful statue of Giabella in the center of the city, and colorful neon signs. It was now known as Giabella City, the biggest landmark in Helmuth. There was such a war here today. Count Carrot, unlike the nobles these days, you wiped away all of your enemy's territory and proved your power by bringing down the Dragon Demon Castle. However, unfortunately, you failed to survive. You won the war, but you ran out of strength. But it wasn't in vain, right? The young noble who brought down Raizakia's Dragon Demon Castle. Count Carrot continued running without turning back. Although he had created quite a distance, Noir's whispers rang clearly in his ears as if she were right beside him. That's how your name will go down in history. Uaf. Count Carrot screamed. Boom. A large lump of dark power fell from the sky and crushed the Count's large stature. That was it. All that remained of the giant demon were blood, flesh, and guts. That's the end, muttered Noir with a bright smile. Indeed, that was all that happened here today. If there were survivors, and even if they witnessed something else, the Queen of the Night Demons would ensure that not a single word would get out. Everything would be forgotten like a dream. No one would remember that Eugene Lionheart had intervened in the war, that the Beast of Revesta had been unilaterally humiliated and killed, that it wasn't the holy sword that finished him, but rather a sword emitting an ominous, gray light. No one would remember that the wielder had not been Eugene Lionheart but a ghost from 300 years ago. Noir giggled while clutching her trembling chest with excitement. Everything made sense now. It felt as if all the cogs had aligned in the right place. She finally understood how Eugene Lionheart could be so powerful at only 21 years of age, why he hated demon folk so much, and how he possessed such mental fortitude. And why he hates me. She understood everything. There was no way she could have forgotten the horrible, sinister weapon, and there was no way she could have forgotten his movements. You must have changed during the 300 years, Noir muttered in a small voice while spreading her bat wings. It's a little upsetting that you don't call it a Jura rampage anymore. The gazes of Noir and Eugene met. Pi Hamel. Hamel of Massacre. Noir grinned while speaking the name of her first love from 300 years ago. Chapter 268. My Hamel too. Kids these days just have no romance. The voice was mixed with giggles as they approached. Don't you think so? They're always trying to weigh the gains and losses, fighting only the battles they are certain to win. They're so weak-minded, but they glamorize their selfish ideals as generosity with conviction. Eugene glared at Noir Giabella with cold, subdued eyes. Did I sound like an old woman whining? Asked Noir. Well, you are old, responded Eugene. My. You shouldn't say such things to a lady. However, I'll let it go since it's you. And you of all people should understand how I feel, right? Asked Noir, coming to stand on equal footing with Eugene. She smiled brightly while pressing down on her chest to help with her overflowing emotions. Pi Hamel. Eugene had prepared himself to be caught. However, hearing the words my Hamel coming from the lips of the Queen of the Night Demons was truly awful, causing his expression to become distorted. Mare immediately hid in the crevice of Eugene's cloak when she felt the rising tension. Rhaenyra, who was still clinging to Eugene's arm, trembled as soon as she met Noir's gaze. The demon's identity was not lost on her, and she recognized the face instantly from countless appearances on the palace's television screens. Noir Giabella, the Queen of the Night Demons, was a well-known celebrity and noble who had captured the public's attention for centuries. She was a shining star among stars. In addition, she was the demon Rhaenyra most admired. In fact, she had imagined asking for a picture and an autograph if she had the chance to meet Noir Giabella through her connection to the Black Dragon. Yet seeing Duke Giabella in person was an entirely different experience. Her beauty and terror were magnified tenfold. Rhaenyra couldn't bring herself to look up, let alone ask for an autograph or photo, as an overwhelming sense of instinctual fear gripped her. "W, are you going by yourself? This lady wants to come in too," stuttered Rhaenyra. "What are you talking about? You couldn't come in even if you wanted to." "This is Mare's room," responded Mare, slapping the back of Rhaenyra's hand without showing any mercy and preventing the hatchling from attempting to follow her inside the cloak. But it was inevitable. Mare could only take shelter in the cloak because the familiar magic was engraved on Eugene. Even if she wanted to, Rhaenyra could not enter the space inside the cloak. "You didn't really think that I wouldn't recognize you, right?" Actually, I think I would be prouder if you did think that, since it would mean that I know you even better than you imagined," said Noir. "I did think you would notice," responded Eugene. He had no intention of going along with Noir's theatrics. He suppressed his killing intention before spitting out his following words. "As long as you weren't a complete idiot." "Humph. Maybe I should have pretended not to notice then. I think it would have been quite flattering to be treated like a dummy by you," responded Noir, intentionally tying herself in knots and blushing. "A dummy blinded by love. Isn't it quite romantic?" "Crazy bitch," Eugene said curtly. "Why did you fight with Jagan?" Noir inquired, ignoring his earlier outburst. After 300 long years, she was at last reunited with Hamel. The encounter kindled a flame within her heart, yet at the same time she couldn't help but feel perplexed. Until just a few days prior, Hamel had concealed his true identity, masquerading as Eugene Lionheart. "Because I thought I needed to kill him today," answered Eugene. He had not been surprised by Noir Giabella's intervention. Eugene had stepped in, fully intent on engaging in combat with Jagan. He had succeeded in killing Jagan and sending the dragon demon castle hurtling toward Carabloom. Eugene knew he couldn't claim that he hadn't foreseen Noir's arrival, since he had not left the castle quietly but instead had become embroiled in the heated battle. Right from the start, Eugene had braced himself for Noir Giabella's attention. He understood on a logical level that his decision was a mistake, but neither he nor Noir were very rational beings to begin with. Eugene's actions had not been solely driven by his emotions. He had assessed Jagan as a menacing creature, recognizing the genuine danger that such a talented and belligerent demon posed. Eugene knew that Jagan's strength had the potential to escalate rapidly, potentially becoming extremely difficult to contain in a short period of time. Eugene had lost count of the number of times he regretted not having dealt a fatal blow to his enemies when he had the opportunity. Even after being reborn into this era, he still felt pangs of remorse when facing foes from 300 years ago. So Eugene had resolved to end Jagan's life and followed through with his decision. Aha! His answer had been curt, but Noir understood what Eugene was saying. So that's what it was. Jagan was the weakest today, so today was the best day to kill him. The battle had been Count Carrod's to take, and in the end he would have taken the Dragon Demon Castle and Carabloom as trophies of his victory. As a result, most of the demon folks residing in the Dragon Demon Castle would have become food for Jagan. Afterward, the honor of having struck down the Dragon Demon Castle would have allowed Count Carrod to advance to the capital, Pandemonium. Moreover, since the contract between Count Carrod and Jagan was valid until the appearance of Raizakia, the Black Dragon, Jagan would have remained at the side of Count Carrod. It was obvious that a new, young, emerging noble would have gathered the unwanted attention of many demon folks. The Count could have used Jagan as a hitman, and Jagan would have used Count Carrod as justification for fighting against numerous high-ranking demons. These skirmishes would only have served to strengthen Jagan and pave the way for a bright future. As such, today had been the right time to kill Jagan. Aha! Noir boasted having great insight into Eugene Lionheart, or rather, Hamel Dinah's. Among the companions of the hero, the Great Vermouth, she had been the most conscious of and interested in Hamel Dinah's. In contrast to his companions, Eugene's background was unremarkable and ordinary. The one who had fought closest alongside the chosen hero was not the arch-wizard reared by elves, nor the mighty warrior of a northern war tribe, nor an artificial incarnation crafted by a group of fanatics. No, the individual who had fought closest by the Great Vermouth's side was simply a mercenary with no notable past. Noir was privy to the reason behind this. 300 years ago, she had invaded deep into Hamel's dreams at a time when the hero's party was unaccustomed to such attacks. It was also the reason why Hamel harbored such deep-seated animosity towards Norgiabella, the queen of the night demons. It's already been 300 years, but some things never change, commented Noir. Hamel was a genius. Of course, the same applied to all of Vermouth's companions. However, even though Hamel was a genius, his limits were made more distinct due to his greatness. He was born weak compared to his talents. Even so, he fought closest with Vermouth because he harbored the greatest hatred against the demon folks, more so than any of his comrades. Vermouth had been chosen as the hero. Sienna had been tasked with killing the demon kings for the sake of the elves' future, since it was imperative that the demon kings be eliminated. As long as they remained alive, the elves would continue to suffer from the demonic disease, and the world tree would wither away. The massacre of a large number of elves by Iris had further fueled Sienna's determination. Molin had been the next tribal chief of the Buyur tribe and a great warrior. His tribe had been located adjacent to Helmuth, and demonic beasts had trampled over his hometown. As such, Molin had made up his mind to subjugate the demon kings for the sake of the future of his tribe and the snowfields. As the imitation incarnation, Anise had been designed from the very beginning as an existence to fight against the demon kings to save the world. Regardless of her own will, everything had guided her to the fate of the saint. On the other hand, Hamel had not been tasked with the fate of his tribe. He had not been carrying the future of a race on his shoulders, and he had not been chosen by the Holy Sword. He had never been forced into anything as his birthright. If he had wanted, Hamel could have chosen a different life. Yes, he had lost his family and village, but there were countless people who shared his fate during a war. It was natural for some to crave revenge while others gave up. In that aspect, Hamel had been special. He never gave up on achieving revenge and eventually climbed to a position where he could enact his vengeance. He had killed 3 demon kings in a life he chose. He had chosen his fate of wielding his blade against the demon kings and the demons and proved himself by massacring them. Hamel's wishes had not been grand. He wasn't out to save his tribe, to save a race, or to save the world. He had wanted nothing more than simple revenge to kill the demon kings. In the end, you did what you wanted, said Noir. Eugene had wanted to kill all the demons of the Dragon Demon Castle. He had wanted to cause a catastrophe in Carabloom. He had wanted to kill Jagan. Such desires had been the essence of the Hamel Dinahs that Noir saw. Although his pure will to kill had been transformed into the desire to save the world later on, the process did not change. He had to kill all the demon kings to save the world. All of Vermouth's companions had shared the same thought, But only Hamel had taken the lead by burning himself like firewood without care for his own life. Hamel Dynas had been the most suited to be called the enemy of the demon folks, more so than the great Vermouth. "Still so lovely," commented Noir. She had encountered Hamel at the bottom of his dream. Despite being an absolute presence in dreams, Noir had been overwhelmed by the curses and hatred Hamel had displayed, resulting in the dream's destruction. Though Noir had alternated between showing hope and despair with her demon eye of fantasy, Hamel's unwavering killing intent had remained resolute. She could not help but fall in love. "I have so much I want to ask you," said Noir. Her body was hot and she wanted to take him into her embrace. She longed to express her love for him in every physical way possible, share every intimate moment with him, and explore the depths of his dreams to share the most profound connection. "Why are you alive when you died 300 years ago? Why do you have the name Lionheart? A reincarnation? By whom? How? Is the imitation incarnation accompanying you really Christina Rogerus?" Eugene glared at Noir while remaining silent. But she found the profane, reckless and spiteful gaze even more lovely. "Why do you have the Moonlight Sword which has no records in history? Why is the Dragon Duchess alive and in your hands, and what are you planning to do from now on?" Noir suddenly stopped. The pieces, the Lionheart family, the vanished Moonlight Sword, the death of the great Vermouth 200 years ago, and the reincarnation of Hamel Dynas, all seemed to click together. Vermouth Lionheart. Indeed he had a good eye. Indeed if he had to choose someone to achieve what he couldn't. "Ho ho, you would have been the right person, my Hamel. I'm sure that the Demon King of Incarceration knows your identity since the two of you even met in person." "What is it that you want to say?" said Eugene. "Nothing much. But can you just answer this one thing? My Hamel, did Gavid Lindman recognize your true identity?" whispered Noir while leaning forward. Eugene felt contempt for her passionate gaze. "No," he answered. "Wonderful. Then that means only the Demon King of Incarceration and I know who you are in Helmuth, right? I love it. I won't ask you anything else. Having some secrets makes it more exciting, right?" "I'm leaving Helmuth," Eugene said while tucking away the Moonlight Sword into his cloak with a deliberate movement. "Right now, there is nothing more for me to do in Helmuth. It won't be easy to leave. My Hamel, you crashed the Dragon Demon Castle, killed countless demon folks and kidnapped Ryzakia's only daughter," responded Noir. "Then what? Will I be judged according to Helmuth's law? I guess I reincarnated for nothing since I'm going to die in vain," spat Eugene. "Ah," Noir moaned, feeling a heartache. "How shameless. By Hamel, there's no way I would let you die like that. If you really have to die one day, your death must be more valuable and noble than it was 300 years ago." "How?" asked Eugene. "Either you die while challenging the Demon King of Incarceration," she paused, then tilted her head, "or die while challenging a demon equivalent to a demon king." Her words were extremely blatant. With a smile, she flicked her fingers toward Eugene, causing a black casino coin to hurl toward him. It was the same coin she had given him in the snowfield. Although he had tossed it away then, he had no choice but to accept it now. "Hamel, you will be free from all inspections in Helmuth just by having that coin. Moreover, you should present that coin instead of your identity card at the Warp Gate. Even if you're bringing along hundreds of demon folks and not just the Dragon Duchess, as long as you have that coin, you should be able to use the Warp Gates without any problem." "All is good," said Eugene while tucking the coin away in his pocket. "But don't call me Hamel." "Ah, right. This can be our little secret. I understand. Ah, but the Dragon Duchess has already heard everything." "What should we do about that?" asked Noir. "What else? I'm going to make sure she doesn't talk," responded Eugene. "That would be extremely easy for me. I could even modify her memory such that she will cooperate with you," said Noir, turning her glistening eyes toward Rhaenyra. Even though she was a dragon as a hatchling, there was no way she could resist the demon eye of fantasy. However, Eugene shook his head and stepped in front of Rhaenyra. "Don't do something so useless," said Eugene. "Have you become a little more gentle? That's attractive as well. I understand, my Hamel." "I won't since you told me not to," responded Noir, withdrawing her demon eye of fantasy. "But when the moment comes when I really shouldn't, I won't listen no matter how much you beg." "Do you think that only applies to you?" scoffed Eugene. More gently brushed over her lower lips with her tongue. "Before parting ways, couldn't they have a light hug or a simple kiss? It would surely quench her excitement somewhat, and Hamel's hatred, anger, and malice would be intensified. Wouldn't it make things much more fun for their next meeting? Hold it in, she told herself sternly. Noir desperately held herself back. This was a fateful reunion with her first love, and the meeting alone greatly excited her. If they happened to touch, she knew she would fail to hold back her urges rather than save them for later. She could not. This wasteland was too shabby for the climax of their romance. Let's celebrate our end in Giabella City, whispered Noir with a wink. Giabella City was already perfect and beautiful, but it would become even more beautiful after today. The moment before the dragon demon castle's fall, Noir had conjured a curtain of magic to contain the destruction. Moreover, she had evacuated all the night demons in the city as well as the dwarves in the mine. The destruction of the mine couldn't have been prevented, but she had robbed Raizakia of the contracts he had with all the dwarves and saved their lives. Instead of laboring away making goods for Raizakia from generation to generation, the dwarves would now live as architects of Giabella City for Noir. It has to be there. Both where you will kill me and where I will kill you, said Noir. Do you think I'm crazy enough to fight you in your territory? Asked Eugene. But you are crazy. Hamel, 300 years ago, you and your companions invaded the territories of the demon kings and killed them in their own castles, said Noir. But you're not a demon king, retorted Eugene. Do you really think so? Asked Noir with a mischievous smile, spreading her wings wide. Well, my Hamel, if you really wish for it, I'll try to build a demon castle in Giabella City. Don't bother. Don't say such gloomy things. Her bat-like wings fluttered and her body was pushed back, up into the air. That's what romance is.